911 operators have one of the toughest jobs out there. Whether they're trying to keep someone calm in the face of tragedy or trying to keep someone alive until help arrives, I can only imagine the kind of stress they would be under. Welcome back everyone, my name is Kennedy, and today on Most Amazing we are counting down some of the most bone-chilling stories that took place on a 911 call. So get ready, because this is the top 10 terrifying true stories told by 911 dispatchers. Starting us off at number 10, a stalker. The first story was posted to Reddit by user psychedelicgoat42, and they talk about the creepiest phone call they ever received in their time as a dispatcher. They start off by explaining that they began working as a dispatcher in university, and one day, quote, a girl called saying she was hiding in her dorm room closet because the girl that had been stalking her had just broken into her room. The caller claimed that the intruder simply sat down on her bed and stared at the wall until the police showed up. It was eerie because it was just so abnormal, not normal person behavior at all. I mean, I wonder if the stalker knew the girl was hiding in the closet or if they were just planning on waiting until the girl came home. Either way, it would be so creepy to be trapped in a closet while your stalker gazed off into the distance, and to be the person on the other line of that situation would definitely be very strange. Coming in at number 9, a missing man. Some 911 dispatchers have these awful horror stories where they hear something traumatizing on the other end of the line, while others experience creepy calls that to this day they aren't able to explain. This next one comes from Reddit, and the user begins their story by saying that this call happened about a year into their job. Quote, I got a call from a young man who identified himself as being 21 years old. He said he went on a hike with his best friend, but this is where it got weird. I asked for his location, and it was about 50 miles from the nearest trailhead, but not in the direction the trails move. I asked him to tell me what the problem was and what services he needed when he burst into tears, saying one moment his friend was in front of them and the next he was gone. I dispatched the sheriff and was told neither man was ever found. It still freaks me out. To this day, they don't know where this man went or if he's even still alive. Coming in at number 8, a first-time dispatcher. This next one also comes from psychedelicgoat42, however this one is not their personal story but rather a story from one of their colleagues. Our Reddit friend begins by explaining that this was their friend's first solo 911 call, and that out of any story they have ever heard, this is the worst. Quote, it was one of her first solo 911 calls, and the caller was requesting medical help with slurred speech. My friend was under the impression it was an elderly gentleman experiencing a stroke, so the friend alerted authorities thinking that this elderly man was needing to go to the hospital. However, when units arrived on the scene, it was not what they were expecting at all. Quote, they discovered that the caller was a 17 who had been in the face by his mother. He bled out and died while my friend was on the phone with him. I mean, I can't imagine how traumatizing that would have been for the dispatcher, and for it to be your first solo call ever. I mean, truly a terrifying experience. Coming in at number 7, Halloween night. Our next story comes from Reddit user Turkey Shoes, whose mother was a 911 dispatcher in the early 90s, and according to our Reddit friend, this is the most insane story their mom ever told them. Quote, she was working one year on Halloween night, and around 10 or 11 p.m. she had a call come in that a couple of guys were driving around town with a dummy or something dragging behind their truck. The dummy was falling apart and pieces of clothing and plastic were being torn off and scattered around the city. Being Halloween, it seemed like a prank, but she had a patrol car try to find and stop the truck just in case. As time went by, more and more people started to call in about it. Eventually, the patrol car caught up with the truck, and it turns out that it was a person. The guys had gone to a store earlier, and when they left, they had backed their truck into an elderly man whose clothes got caught in the rear bumper. The two guys never even knew that they were dragging around another human being all across town for miles. Sadly, the elderly man passed away, and those pieces of clothing scattered around were his clothing, flesh, and body parts. Coming in at number 6, strange noises. This next story on our list was posted to Reddit by the user 4x49ers, and they start off by saying, quote, "The single worst call I've ever taken was a woman who was calling in that she was hearing weird noises in her house. While walking through her house, she started screaming and told me there was someone in her house. At first, our Reddit friend assumed someone had snuck in, maybe to rob the woman or something, but as the call continued, it turned out to be much more terrifying. All of a sudden, there were a couple soft pops followed by a gurgling sound, and by this time the cops were already on their way to the scene. Still not knowing the sound our dispatcher heard over the phone, it wasn't until after the officers had cleared the house and found her dead that they put together the pieces of what they had heard over the phone. Apparently, the sound of bullets is much softer over the phone than one would expect. But the worst part of it all, during the investigation, police discovered that her adult son had been the one who killed her while under the influence, which is a truly horrible ending to an already awful story. Next up at number 5, a woman on fire. Our next terrifying story was posted to Reddit about 9 years ago by the user Skidmod, and they say that while they had some bad and scary calls in their day, one of the worst calls they ever received was from a woman around 11:30 p.m. at night. Quote, "A female calls me screaming. She was yelling, 'I'm burning,' so I told her to stop, drop, and roll, and once the flames were out, I told her to turn on the hose and put cool water on it until the paramedic got there. Once she was a little calmer, I was able to learn more about what had happened. So she had been drinking with her boyfriend and he got depressed and decided tonight was the night he was going to kill his girlfriend and then take his own life. So in his intoxicated state, he found a gas can and started dumping it on himself and his girlfriend and lit them both on fire. It also managed to catch the house, fence, and yard on fire. Now, unlike some of the other ones on this list, luckily both of them survived. However, he ended up getting the worst of the burns. I just hope that that woman who called the dispatcher is no longer with that man. Coming in at number 4, under the influence. So before I get into this one, I have to warn you, it's a lot. So while I'm going to try and be delicate, if you have a queasy stomach, just be warned. This next story was posted to Reddit a few years ago by the user UCs_lightning, and while it doesn't include a planned killing or anything like that, it might still be one of the more shocking things I have come across. Quote, "I was a 911 dispatcher in Portland, Oregon, and received a call from a strung out girl. Story was, she said her boyfriend had been doing a lot of hard drugs for 3 days and owned a lab. Now, here is where it gets gross. Quote, when she called, she was screaming that her boyfriend had wiggly purple worms in his arms and there was blood everywhere. Turned out they were his veins. He was literally so out of his gourd on drugs that he began tearing at his flesh and ripping out his veins. I mean, I can't. According to our Reddit friend, they switched professions pretty quickly after that. I would have probably done the same. Coming in at number 3, a horrible accident. I am sure that dispatchers receive a lot of calls from people that are suffering from freak accidents. However, I can only imagine the fear that swept across this caller when they received this phone call. Warning, this one is also a bit gruesome. So this story comes from Reddit user VicDemone911, and I actually can't wrap my brain around how helpless this dispatcher must have felt at this moment. They begin by saying that they received a call from a man with a very difficult to understand speech, and so at first they thought it might be a heart attack or a stroke or something, but sadly it was much worse. Finally, they were able to get his address clearly to send help, and when they could finally get out of him what the problem was, he said, quote, "Cut leg off chainsaw." From there, it was just guttural moans and groans until the phone suddenly went silent. As it turns out, he had fallen from a tree with his chainsaw and accidentally cut off his leg. He then tied his belt around the stump, crawled to his phone on the porch, and called. But sadly, he died with the phone in his hand before help could arrive. I mean, I hope they gave this poor dispatcher some counseling after this one. Coming in at number 2, Hurricane Katrina. Next up, we have a story from a 911 operator who was working in Alabama during the time that Hurricane Katrina hit, and, well, let them tell it. Quote, "We started getting lots of calls from New Orleans and the Mississippi Gulf Coast for some reason. I guess they started rooting to us after all the 911 centers to the west of us started going down. Anyway, I got a call from a woman who said she was trapped in her house on Gordon Street between Florida and Law. I was confused at first because we have a Florida street in Mobile, and after double checking and not being able to find her address, I asked her what city she was calling from. She said, I'm in New Orleans. I tried to route her to New Orleans 911 and the New Orleans Fire Department, but couldn't get through. She started screaming and said that the water was coming up into the attic where she was. I told her to find something heavy and break the attic vent out so she could get out onto the roof, but the vent was too small for her to crawl through. She sat down and started crying. I told her I would stay on the line with her for as long as she wanted me to. I stayed on the line and listened as she cried, prayed, cussed, and prayed some more. A little while later, I could hear her struggling to keep her head and phone above water. Then the phone went dead. To this day, I don't know if she lived or died. I mean, talk about haunting. The Reddit user then went on to say that they quit 911 3 months later, and who can blame them? I can't imagine having to hear someone try to fight for their life and be able to do pretty much nothing to help. And last up in our number 1 spot, kidnapped. Just so that we can all take a big breath, I will tell you that this one ends well. However, for both the kidnappee and this poor dispatcher, I can only imagine how terrifying this moment would have been. Posted by the user Crux1836, they say the most scared they have ever been on a call was when a young woman who'd been kidnapped called after jumping out of a moving car in an office park. Quote, she had no idea where she was, and I couldn't get a valid location on her cell phone as this was in 2004, only the nearest cell tower. Usually, I would ask a caller in her situation to start looking in mailboxes for mail with an address on the envelope, but this was an office park with mail slots that she couldn't access. She was literally running for her life while I was on the phone with her, hiding behind dumpsters and bushes while the kidnappers patrolled the office park. The terror in her voice was gut-wrenching. She had already been beaten, and she was afraid that if they found her, they would kill her. After about 5 minutes of this terrifying call, she was finally able to find a business sign on one of the windows in the complex, frantically searched for the business address, and the radio dispatcher aired the location, to which at least a dozen officers responded. They found the suspect vehicle pretty quickly, and a short foot chase ensued. The first officer to reach the caller ordered a victim's advocate because of the condition she was in. I had to take a few minutes off after that call. Yeah, no kidding. Well, that's all I've got for you today, guys. I hope you liked this video. If you did, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments down below the craziest 911 stories you've ever heard about. Until next time, friends.